Today's podcast episode is one of a series of podcast episodes I recorded with my husband, Mac Story, on a book that we co-wrote together, Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. I know you'll enjoy the leadership principles that Mac brings to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, so be sure to follow Mac on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter at Mac Story, or subscribe to the Blue Collar Leadership podcast for more on the leadership principles that Mac teaches. Well, hello, everyone. We are back with part 4 of 15 in our podcast series on our book, Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. So today's podcast episode is all about resisting change and how do we respond to that? How do we deal with that when other people are resisting change? And what's interesting is that we can recognize the fact that other people are resisting change, and we can easily recognize the effects that it has in other people's lives. But when it comes to our own, sometimes we don't even realize that it's us ourselves who are being resistant to change. And it's much more difficult to see the impact that resisting change and the consequences of resisting change when it comes to our own lives. So, Matt, last podcast episode, you wrapped up with just kind of a cliffhanger and talked about you were going to share a story of someone who was resistant to change. So I've got to ask you to just jump in and share that story because I know everyone wants to hear it.
All right, so it wraps up pretty much this whole book in one story, but it definitely wraps up Nothing Fails Like Success. The impact of change is covered in this story. And last time we talked about 2 ways to deal with change, being proactive or reactive. And then today we're talking about resisting change. So this story definitely wraps up these first 4 sections. So today we're on part 4 of 15 in this series, Resisting Change. So I want to tell you a story. Not going to share the gentleman's name, doesn't matter about his name, but I was doing lean consulting. This was in 2009, so it's been a while back. I won't ever forget this guy, but I walked into this plant for the very first time. I walked in and I was touring the plant with the plant manager. We were going to look around the plant, manufacturing plant, and figure out where was a good area to go do a pilot project. First time they had ever done any lean manufacturing, any intentional, methodical process improvement. They'd never really done anything like that. They just kind of got better by accident, whatever that was. And so we were touring around, and I saw this area, had a man standing on a steel platform about 6-8 inches tall. The purpose of the platform was to get him up near the machine for ergonomics, keep from bending his back so much and having to stretch and reach. So he was standing on that machine working. There were parts everywhere hanging on racks, and equipment was spread out all over the place. They had racks on across the aisle and racks all in the department, racks everywhere full of parts. And I asked questions about that, and I said, that'll be a good one. I mean, there was so much inventory. And if you understand about lean manufacturing, usually when you see a lot of inventory, that's a pretty good indicator. There's a lot of waste in that process, a lot of opportunities. So I said, let's do that. And the plant manager said, what's going to change if we do it here? I said, all these racks will go away. All the inventory will go away. The space will be reduced to about 25% of what it is today. And that guy over there, the platform he's standing on, is probably going to be gone. A lot of things are going to change. I said, but do me a favor, don't tell anybody. I'm sharing with you because you asked me what might change. And I've done this thousands of times, and I got a good idea what's going to happen. But I'm going to make it their idea. It's not going to be my idea. I said, so don't tell them about it. And then I was scheduled, and he said he wouldn't tell. So I was scheduled to be back in about a month or so. So I come back, show up on Monday. All I had told him was give me a team of 6 to 10 people, which he had done. I said, make sure that guy on that platform is one of the guys. And he was in there. He was on the team, and then mix up everyone else. It didn't matter who it was. And so I walk in on Monday morning. I didn't know any of these folks. They didn't know me. Most of them kind of knew each other, but some of them didn't know each other really at all. Most of these companies are pretty big, so a lot of people work in the same place without really knowing each other. Anyway, this gentleman here, I'm going to just call him Bob. His name wasn't Bob, but Bob was sitting right to my left. I was standing kind of at the head of the table, and everybody was lined up around the table, so it's kind of like a horseshoe shape, and I was on the open end. Mm-hmm. Bob was there to my left. And so one thing I would always ask these teams on Monday morning, how long you been working here? What do you do? what you do for fun when you're not working here. What's your background relative to lean? I kind of want to know who knew anything about it. Most of the time, nobody knew anything about it. And then one important question was always, what were you thinking last week about this week? That's a mindset question. I want to know, where was everybody's mind relative to what we were about to do?
Sure. It tells you a lot about their attitude in the moment.
Yep, everybody knew we were there to change something, and I was an outsider. I didn't know anything about their plant. They'd never even seen me in there unless they saw me walk through that one day. They don't even know who I was or what I was going to be doing, but they knew I was leading the team. So everybody shares. I go around the room, and I saved Andy for last. Well, now you know his real name was Andy. It wasn't Bob. But anyway, I'm gonna go Andy now. What do you think, Rhea?
Okay.
I talk about him so often, but it doesn't really matter what his name was. I ain't gonna say his last name, but his name's Andy. It's easier to say Andy than Bob anyway. So anyway, I save Andy for last. So we go around the room. Everybody's sharing. Everybody's open. Andy's sitting there with his arms crossed. He just got his arms crossed. He ain't even looking at me. Kind of angry. Obviously angry. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to share anything. So finally, I get him to share some information, and he wanted to share it all, but he wouldn't share the last part. What was he thinking last week about this week? And finally, I keep talking to him, and I tell him, you're the most important person on the team. You work in the area. This is your space that we're all trying to make better. I said, I really need to know what you were thinking last week about this week. And finally, he turned around. He said, I'll share with you what I was thinking about last week. He turned around, looked at me, and he was angry. You know, I'm not angry when I'm doing this podcast, but Andy was angry that day. And he looked at me. He said, you want to know what I was thinking last week, Mac? I was thinking, I couldn't wait till you got here this week so I could cut your throat. That was his exact words, and he was mad about it. And because I'm proactive now instead of reactive, the old Mac, that wouldn't have worked so good before I learned all this stuff. But see, now I'm proactive. So everything changed that moment. We're talking about change happens. Everything changed at that moment that Andy said that. But because I was proactive and I was responding based on values, which was leading the team effectively through change, I just reached over and patted him on the shoulder and said, why don't you tell us how you really feel, Andy? Kind of made a joke out of it. And, you know, people kind of laughed, but Andy didn't really laugh. And I said, what in the world would cause you to feel like that about me? You don't even know me. And he said, well, plant manager told me that you were going to take away my platform. That's the same plant manager that I had asked not to tell Andy about the whole event. And then he went ahead and told Andy, because Andy was sometimes, I guess, cause some trouble for that boss. I don't know, but that's kind of the story I got later. And so he was trying to, in his words, soften him up, trying to tell him what was going to happen, be transparent. It's what he maybe thought he was doing. I don't know, but I had asked him not to do it because I've been through this so many times. I knew what was going to happen. People going to start talking, guessing, making up rumors. They couldn't see what I saw coming. All they could see was the way it is now. He knew he needed that platform. It made his job easier. Why wouldn't he be mad if someone was going to take it away?
Sure.
What he didn't know was we were going to lower both of the machines, so they're going to end up being the same exact height as he was on the platform. But now you don't have to step up and down off the platform. And now because there's no big platform, we can slide the machines together, lower both of those machines, and he don't need a platform. It's just something to collect dirt and debris and trip on, and just a waste, total waste. So now I knew I had to build trust with Andy. So I said, Andy, this is the way it's going to be. You're in charge of that platform this week. You're the most important person. If you don't want that platform to be taken away this week, we're not going to take it away. If anybody in this plant wants that platform gone this week and you don't, you let me know and I'm leaving. I'm going home. Because I'm not going to support people who are going to treat you, disrespect you and your opinion like that. And again, I knew what was probably coming, but they didn't know. But I knew probably was not going to be an issue. And I said, if we keep it this week and I leave and somebody makes you get rid of that platform after I leave, you call me and let me know. I won't ever be back for the same reason. And guess who was on that forklift on Wednesday with a chain hooked to the platform, throwing it out back in the scrap metal bin? It was Andy. It was Andy's idea because he had learned a lot of stuff. He had learned to see things in a new way, and he was bought in. It was his idea. It was his platform. It made a lot of sense. But on Monday morning, he was extremely resistant to change. And the number one reason he was resistant to change was because of the leader he had. The leader may or may not have been telling him for a bad reason. I assume it was for a good reason, because the leader of that plant was responsible for leading as well. But he went about it a completely different way than I would have. And he created a lot of problems where I try to prevent a lot of problems. But I have
Mm,
a much higher level degree, even at that time, understanding of high impact leadership. The other guy was just managing the people. I was trying to lead the people. And ultimately, I was responsible.
yeah. Yeah, we manage things in processes, and we should. They need to be managed, but things in processes don't have feelings and thoughts and emotions. And when we try to manage people as if they were the chair sitting in the corner of the room without consideration of those feelings and emotions, that's where we find we get in a lot of trouble from a leadership perspective. You know, resistance to change, it's varied from person to person and even from situation to situation. Has that been your experience where you see that one person might not resist change in one environment, but then they get in a different environment and then suddenly they're very resistant to change?
Yeah, because their values change. I've had people on these teams in plants where I go to multiple plants, over time and work with a lot of sometimes the same people. A lot of times there's new people, but sometimes there's the same people. What I found is it's easier for people to lead change in someone else's area than their own.
Absolutely. From my perspective and my experience, I think that the one of the reasons we resist change, maybe the main reason we resist change, is fear of the unknown, right? And so it's much easier to deal with change and be positive and proactive about it if somebody else is going to have to deal with the unknown, if it's not going to affect us as personally. And I think that the more personal or the more impact the change has on us personally, the more resistance we naturally want to throw up, right? We just want to put those fences up and protect ourselves, because change can be scary. I mean, obviously there can be some positives that come out of change, but it can be scary when we think about we don't know how the change is going to impact us, or what if we don't like it as much, or what if we can't go back to the way it was if we don't like it. And that fear of the unknown is what drives a lot of resistance to change, because some people will choose to resist change and stay with a known situation even if it's not the best choice, rather than go through the unknown. I'm sure everyone's heard the old saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? And it's kind of that mindset of saying, oh, stick with what you got, it's working, versus maybe you could double your opportunity if you're willing to take a chance, or to deal with some changes. And as leaders, I think that that's where we become stagnant, right? The moment we are willing to settle for status quo is the moment we stop growing the organization, we stop growing the team, we stop growing as leaders.
Absolutely. So it kind of sounds like you were talking about those three reasons people resist change.
Yeah, talk about those three reasons some of us resist change.
And you kind of were touching on the first one. That's why I wasn't sure if you were talking about that one yet or not. But it's not it's not comfortable. That's the number one reason I think people resist change. It's not comfortable to change for most people, especially
Yeah.
reactive people. And it's kind of like it's more comfortable for me to come in and change your office than it is for me to change my office. And that's what I was talking about a moment ago. And especially for you to come in and change my office, right? I can come change your office. It doesn't matter to me, but it matters to you. And I can change my office easier than I can let you change it because I kind of know what I'm looking for. But if you just come in and start changing things, that change is going to be uncomfortable. Now we're probably going to have conflict to deal with there. But
Mm.
that's one of the biggest changes. I mean, one of the biggest reasons people resist. And so proactive people actually become comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to do. And we do speak to that a little more in depth in the book, because these three reasons some of us resist change do come from the book. Number two, number two reason some of us resist change is it's not easy, right? Because we have to put energy into the new situation. And you can remember over the course of your career, your lifetime, as you've learned something new, maybe it was the time your company changed software programs, or maybe email, and you had to learn how the new system worked, and it was stressful to learn how to do that, right? Anytime we're learning something new, it's a little bit stressful. It might be a great thing, but there's some stress in it. It requires more energy and effort than what we've done, because we have to relearn, right? We have to unlearn, and then we have to relearn. And I know for a lot of us, that's a difficult thing. I use the example of when you and I, we sold our house, and back, this has been several years ago, and we were, fully dedicated to growing our what we do now, and getting more into speaking and teaching on leadership and all of that. And one of the sacrifices we made was selling our house and moving to an apartment. And so, there was definitely some change there. But what was interesting is when we got to the apartment, obviously it was a new kitchen. And for about the first 3 or 4 months, the drawer that I wanted to put the silverware in didn't fit. The silverware holder that I had in the previous house didn't fit in that particular drawer. And so I just kind of moved it to a different drawer until I could get to the store and get a new silverware holder. And it took me a couple of months, right? It wasn't a high priority, but I finally did. I picked up a new silverware holder and brought it home, and finally put the silverware in the new kitchen where I wanted it. And for the rest of the time we lived in that apartment, every time I wanted a fork to go eat my salad, I would go to that old drawer first, even though it wasn't the most logical place for the silverware. It wasn't the best place for the silverware. But, that one little change, and this is minor, right? We're talking about moving your forks and knives. But unlearning and relearning something requires us to have to put thought and effort and energy into it. And so that's why a lot of people resist change, because it's not as easy to unlearn and to relearn.
Yeah, the third reason that some of us resist change is it requires risk.
Hmm.
And we don't mind risking often if the risk is small or low, and we don't mind risking as much when we stand to gain big, but we don't naturally like to take risks if the odds aren't good or we stand to lose a lot. And people don't know. That's again why leadership matters. Leaders can help declare our intention. If I'm a leader, I can declare my intention. What is the intention from this change? I can help people see if there is risk, what it is. Is it low? Is it high? Why should we take it? The more you can help engage people in the process of change, the more accepting they're going to be of change. But you got to understand first, why are people resistant to change? If you don't know why people are resistant to change as a leader, and maybe you're resistant to change for all these reasons and hadn't really thought about it, but if you want to lead people through change, you've got to know what are the obstacles. So you got to overcome people being uncomfortable. You got to overcome people thinking it's going to be hard or it's risky. It may be risky to them and not risky to you.
Hmm.
Who knows what it's going to be? And I just want to say one thing about me. I started off when I told that story, I said, the guy's name was Bob, but then I slipped up and said his real name, Andy. Doesn't really matter. I just mainly it's for his leader is why I don't usually tell the name, because Andy was a champ. He was awesome. Andy was phenomenal. He led that week. He was out, like I say, he was on the forklift throwing the platform out. But he told me later, I mean, even that week, we made significant, almost double the outcome of that sale, double the production of that sale during that one week. But later I talked to Andy and he became a supervisor, and he was one of my biggest fans. I remember going back after that first event. I went back and out in the plant, out in the shop floor, all the columns out there had a piece of white paper on it. It wasn't there before. So when I went up and looked at it, it was a lesson on trust that I had taught. That first 4 hours I would teach on leadership and personal growth. Back then I was teaching a lesson on trust on that Monday morning. And I said, who put this up? Because I knew whoever put that lesson on trust on all these columns, they were everywhere. Whoever that was on my team. They were buying into what I was selling, and they was trying to help me lead the organization, that specific plan, in a better way. And so I started asking around. It took me a little while, but finally I got the answer, and it was Andy. Andy was my biggest cheerleader out there. And the reason was I had built a lot of trust with Andy. Andy liked my leadership style. And so Andy was never a problem. That's another thing when we're talking about change and people resisting change, because Andy had been under his leaders, the plant manager and supervisor, whoever all of his leaders in the chain of command were. He had been under them the whole week or two before I got there. And he was resisting change like crazy. When I walked in and I brought in a higher level of leadership, once I got him to talk, once I told him how it was going to be, that I was supporting him, his opinion mattered more than anybody's, and he believed me. That was the key. He had to know I was being authentic. I was already being transparent. Was I being honest and authentic? He believed me. He never resisted change for me. That's why this stuff matters so much for leaders, because I've walked into so many plants and met so many people, thousands of Andys out there, where the leader says, this person is going to be a problem. They've always been a problem. They're going to be a problem on this team. Just want to tell you, I just want to warn you, go ahead and get you ready. Hardly ever have those people been a problem. The reason is I led in a different style than their leader had led. I did a lot of the stuff that we talk about in this book or on this podcast. And so I had an advantage, a leadership advantage, that I could overcome that resistance and turn it into positive energy.
Yeah, Daniel Burrus said, managers change behavior, leaders change the way you think without you realizing it. And there again, it comes back to a leader is going to help you with that mindset. Most people are resistant to change because they haven't been taught or they haven't learned how to think about and how to leverage change, right? It's not that they're bad people, certainly. It's just that they've never learned how to leverage change, how to embrace it, how to look for the positives. And so their emotions or their fear or their worry can certainly cause them to be reactive because they have not, it's the saying, we don't know what we don't know. And until we start to learn and grow, it's not going to change. And that comes down to the leader's responsibility of saying, I've got to take responsibility for leading myself through that change. Again, back to the title of the book, leading myself through this change, but I also take on the ownership and responsibility of helping lead others through change. And leaders have to change how they think in order to model that higher level of thinking and a different level of being so that they can model for their team.
Yeah, and that was the missing piece. If I had been the plant manager of that plant, knowing what I know now, and not throwing that leader under the bus, most leaders haven't had any leadership development training whatsoever, especially in blue collar industries. But if I would have known what I know now, and I was the plant manager, I would have been taking people definitely through this book, through a book study, so that I could talk with them, interact with them, talk about all the changes that's going to happen, get rid of a lot of their fears, get rid of the resistance, help them understand what becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable actually means. But he didn't prepare them at all. What I just described is how a leader leads change. Managers just manage. They just tell people what to do. They don't care if they buy in. I mean, I've worked in places where, they tell you if you don't like it, hit the road.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had leaders stand in the room and they don't understand where I'm coming from and how I'm going to lead. But when they feel resistance, they want to step up and be the hero and flex their authority and try to shut somebody down and tell them, hey, you don't have to be here. If you don't want to be here, you can leave. And that ain't how you build trust and respect with people, talking to them like that. Because when they're being resistant to change, they're not thinking about quitting their job. They may quit their job, but most of the time they're just kind of lightly resistant in the beginning, and they're just trying to keep things the same. Not bad people, not necessarily people who want to quit and leave the company and all that kind of stuff. They just don't want their world to change, and they start telling themselves all these kind of stories about how it's going to be and why it's going to be, and most of them are not true. And so we got to look at, you want somebody to lead change, you want a leader to lead change. You don't want a manager to lead change, because they're not really leading change, they're managing change. Leaders, we talked about this before, leaders want to help things go right, so they're proactive, speaking on our last episode. But managers are just trying to correct the things that are going wrong, so they don't deal with all this proactive stuff. They don't deal with developing mindsets. They're looking for compliance, not commitment. Leaders, when change happens, leaders are looking for committed people. People are committed to helping move the organization forward. Managers, when change happens, managers are just looking for people who will comply. who will make the change. They don't care if they bought in or not. They just want to make the change and do it the way I told you to do it. That's two completely different mindsets.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to leaders have to understand those who are avoiding and resisting change can be toxic to the team and the organization. And as a leader, you've got to decide how much time and energy are you willing to dedicate to help those who are not on board begin to embrace the change, right? How much time can you give them? How much energy can you give them? And at what point do you decide that it's time for them to move on? And that'll take us to the next chapter in the next podcast episode where we're talking about change or be changed.
Oh, that sounds pretty good, Rhea. Change or be changed. I like that. So that'll be part 5. I'm gonna end this on a quote right here. It's from Sir John Templeton. He says, "Unfortunately, too often people focus on the negatives and lose sight of the multitude of blessings that surround us and the limitless potential that exists for the future."
Mm,
People get tangled up on the negative and they miss the
all,
positive.
all too powerful. All
But
too
the
powerful.
but the one who's thinking about the positive is going to leave those ones thinking about the negative far behind. So we'll talk to you next time.